Which faith survives when everything is questioned? Christianity adapts. Islam resists. Gen Z is not losing faith because they are immoral, distracted, or rebellious. They are losing faith because they were born into a world that taught them to question everything, including the very foundations of meaning itself. And for the first time in human history, belief is no longer inherited by default, but interrogated like a hypothesis. This generation scrolls faster than sermons, fact-checks, miracles, and demands coherence over comfort. And when they look at religion, they don't ask, is this tradition ancient, but is this true, livable, and intellectually honest right now? And that's where the real tension begins. Because Christianity and Islam, two global faiths, claiming ultimate truth, are suddenly being tested in a cultural courtroom, ruled by skepticism, data, identity politics, trauma awareness, and moral accountability. Christianity, especially in the West, is often perceived by Gen Z not as a spiritual framework, but as an institution entangled with colonial history, political power, church scandals, and selective morality. When Gen Z hears Christian language, many don't hear transcendence. They hear culture wars, hypocrisy, and unresolved contradictions between scripture and modern ethics. The doctrine of original sin clashes with a generation raised on psychology and self-worth. Substitutionary atonement raises moral questions about justice and responsibility. And the Trinity, for many, feels like theological abstraction rather than clarity. Add to that the visible fragmentation of Christianity into thousands of denominations, each claiming truth, yet disagreeing on essentials. And Gen Z begins to ask a dangerous question. If truth comes from God, why does it fracture every time humans touch it? Christianity's challenge today is not lack of followers, but lack of epistemic authority. Gen Z Dawson T rejects Jesus as a moral figure, but they increasingly reject the church as a reliable transmitter of truth. Meanwhile, Islam enters this debate from a different position, often misunderstood, often misrepresented, yet strangely resilient in the very areas where Gen Z demands strength, clarity, structure, discipline, and uncompromising monotheism. Islam does not ask Gen Z to feel their way into faith. It asks them to submit their intellect, ego, and desire to a singular, coherent worldview, where God is not fragmented, negotiable, or culturally revised. For a generation exhausted by infinite choices, Islam's unapologetic boundaries are not always oppressive, they are stabilizing. The Quran does not present itself as a mystery waiting to be updated by culture. It presents itself as a final revelation meant to judge culture, not obey it. And this is where modern scrutiny hits both religions differently. Christianity, shaped historically by councils, translations, and evolving doctrines, struggles to answer Gen Z's demand for textual preservation and original intent. Islam, by contrast, boldly claims unchanged scripture, preserved language, and a living tradition that traces practice directly back to the Prophet Muhammad, without institutional intermediaries. Gen Z, raised in an age of receipts and archives, finds this claim intellectually provocative, even if emotionally challenging. But scrutiny cuts both ways. Islam's moral absolutism clashes with Gen Z's emphasis on personal autonomy, sexual identity, and expressive individualism. Where Christianity often adapts, Islam resists, and Gen Z must decide whether resistance equals irrelevance or integrity. This is the central question of future faith. Should religion evolve with society, or should society be judged by revelation? Christianity, in its modern Western forms, increasingly chooses adaptation, softening doctrines, reinterpreting texts, and aligning with prevailing moral trends to remain socially acceptable. Gen Z notices this, and instead of feeling welcomed, many feel manipulated, sensing that truth is being negotiated for applause. Islam, meanwhile, often refuses that negotiation, and paradoxically, that refusal commands respect even from critics. You have to agree with Islam, to recognize that it knows exactly what it claims to be. And in an era where identity is fluid but truth is scarce, clarity becomes attractive. Gen Z debates faith, not because they hate God, but because they are tired of inherited answers that collapse under pressure. They ask, if God exists, why should belief depend on geography? Christianity struggles here because its historical spread is inseparable from empire. While Islam confronts this question head-on by framing itself as a message for all humanity, not a Western export, they ask, why does suffering exist? Christianity often responds with theological complexity that feels distant. While Islam frames suffering as a test, a calibration of justice beyond this life, emotionally harsh perhaps, but philosophically consistent. They ask, can ancient doctrines survive modern scrutiny? Islam replies by challenging modern assumptions. And this is why the debate isn't really Islam versus Christianity, it's adaptability versus absoluteness, flexibility versus finality, cultural alignment versus moral confrontation. Gen Z stands at this crossroads not as passive recipients, but as jurors. They are not asking which religion feels nicer, they are asking which one can survive being questioned without dissolving. Christianity's future relevance may depend on whether it can reclaim intellectual confidence without political compromise, whether it can address textual ambiguity honestly, and whether it can separate the message of Jesus from the machinery built around it. Islam's future relevance may depend on whether it can communicate its timelessness without arrogance, its discipline without dehumanization, and its moral certainty without dismissing genuine human struggle. The generation that questions everything is not allergic to faith. It is allergic to incoherence. They don't want vague spirituality or inherited slogans. They want a worldview that explains reality, restrains desire, grounds morality, and answers death without blinking. The uncomfortable truth is this. Gen Z may not be running from God. They may be running from diluted gods that bend when pressed. And as modern scrutiny intensifies, only religions that can withstand ruthless questioning without rewriting themselves will remain standing. Whether Christianity can reclaim that resilience, or whether Islam's uncompromising monotheism will speak louder to a generation drowning in relativism, is not a matter of trend, it's a matter of truth. And truth, unlike culture, does not need to reinvent itself every generation. It only needs to survive being questioned.